Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled The DCR's Inspection Process, hosted by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Louie with the Cal Asian Chamber, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's learning management system. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and the audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. And please ask questions about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A where you will also get responses in the last 15 minutes of tonight's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. And finally, please note that the content presented tonight was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor constitute legal advice. If you have any specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Now let's transition to our presentation for tonight. Our presenter for tonight's webinar is Courtney Lang. Courtney is a California-based consultant specializing in cannabis real estate, licensing, and business development. She partners with businesses and leadership to build the foundation of a successful company. In addition to her cannabis background, Courtney offers her clients over 10 years of experience working in the natural foods industry for several small to medium-sized companies. She has also helped large teams develop and execute strategic plans and grassroots marketing campaigns, create company-wide policies and procedure, and manage boards and stakeholder groups. Now, I would like to ask Courtney to join me on screen. Welcome, Courtney. Feel free to start sharing your screen and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Frank. Hi,
Welcome.
everyone, and welcome back to tonight's webinar. This is a series on how to apply for a commercial cannabis license with the Department of Cannabis Regulation in the city of LA. Tonight's webinar topic is initial inspection process. This is the fourth webinar in the past month or so that I have had the pleasure of leading, and pretty much all of them have been leading up to one another. So today we'll make sure we start out with an introduction that brings everybody to the same page. So if you attended all the webinars, it'll be a nice review of the content that we've gone over in previous webinars, or if you're jumping in today for the first time on these licensing webinars, it'll be a good opportunity for you to flag some topics that you can go back and watch for the recordings that are available on the website. The second part of this agenda, we'll take a look at what is temporary approval. The initial inspection process is currently a part of the temporary approval process. So I want to make sure that everybody is aware of what steps need to be completed prior to initial inspection process, as it's just a small part of temporary approval and annual license process. So from there, we'll jump into initial inspection process and preparation. We'll take a quick look at all the resources that we will have taken a look at in this webinar so that you have a source to go to for all the links. And then we'll complete this webinar with a Q&A section so that everybody can get some of their specific questions answered, hopefully. So as I mentioned, we'll start off with an introduction that'll zoom everybody into what tonight's webinar process or webinar topic is. So the purpose is, number one, to provide a high-level overview of the Department of Cannabis Regulations licensing process. And number two is to familiarize attendees with the initial inspection process and resources. We'll start off here with taking a look at what the available license types are in the city of LA. So this is the first webinar that we did. And this is going to allow you to understand whether or not the city of Los Angeles is currently accepting applications for the following license types: So before you can submit a temporary approval application, before you can submit pre-application, right? The first step really is to figure out what license type you want to operate in the city of LA. And so the ones that are available right now is number one, delivery. This is limited to social equity individual applicants only right now. And currently the city is accepting applications. Another license that's available is non-volatile manufacturing, distribution, and testing labs. These license types are currently being accepted. Applications are being accepted, and these are open to the general public. Cultivation licenses are limited to social equity individual applicants, but at this time, we're not accepting applications. DCR is not accepting applications, but hopefully in a short while, they'll become available through what's called the public convenience and necessity process. But again, currently cultivation licenses are not being accepted. And once we make that available, it will be only to the social equity individual applicants. With retail licenses, these are limited to social equity individual applicants as well. In terms of how to apply for one, you would know at this point in time if you're eligible for a retail license. There was a lottery done at the end of 2022 for social equity individual applicants, whereby those lottery licenses were allocated to specific individuals. So retail licenses are limited to social equity individual applicants that were chosen through the lottery process. And volatile manufacturing, currently this license type is not being accepted by the city of LA. And so you'll have to look back at a later date to see if that's something that's available, but right now it's not available to general public or social equity individual applicants. The next slide here is taking a look at a high level of the DCR licensing process. So the DCR requires that an applicant undergo the following processes prior to engaging in commercial cannabis activity. So number one is the getting started checklist. This is going to provide you instructions on how to complete various business entity filings and registries. Number one would be with the Secretary of State. You will need to file for a business entity number. And once you have filed with the Secretary of State for your business entity, you'll then need to file for a federal employer identification number with the IRS. And you'll also have to apply for a local tax number with the city of LA. Anyhow, this getting started checklist, it's not just about registering your entity. There's a couple of steps on the licensing portal that it goes through that you need to do for an individual to start their account on the licensing portal. A business, you also have to have a business account on the licensing portal. And you'll need to create a legal business entity record with the city of LA. All of these items are part of the getting started checklist, and they're what you're going to need to complete prior to starting the pre-application review process, which is next. Next, number two in the process here is the pre-application review. And this is the process where you're going to have DCR determine whether or not your proposed business premise location is compliant and eligible. So for instance, once you find a location that you want to lease or purchase, this is the process where you're going to submit the address, and the DCR will then confirm whether or not the sensitive uses do not interfere with this business premise location, that the business premise location is also in the right zoning area. So we have a webinar that we did on the pre-application review process 2 weeks ago. And if that's something that you think you might need more information on, you can go back and watch that recording. The third step in the process is temporary approval license, or soon to be the annual license process. And this is DCR's authorization to engage in commercial cannabis activity at a business premise location that has obviously gone through the pre-application review process. The fourth step in DCR's licensing process is the provisional state license, or again, soon to be the annual state license. And this is the state of California's authorization to engage in commercial cannabis business activity at a business premise location. So all four of these processes would need to be completed in order for you to engage in commercial cannabis activity in the city of Los Angeles through, again, this is the DCR's cannabis licensing process. Next, we want to make sure that we took a look at other required city clearances and permits. DCR is not the only department within the city of LA that is regulating cannabis businesses. Basically, prior to the issuance of a temporary approval license or annual license from the Department of Cannabis Regulation, applicants must obtain all required permits and clearances from other city and county departments, including but not limited to the following. The first on this list is the Department of Building and Safety, which is a department within the city of LA. And some examples of what you're going to need to do with the Department of Building and Safety is you'll need to verify the use or occupancy of the building that you intend to operate out of. And these will all be done after you've completed the pre-application process, but before you operate, right? So as soon as you get the pre-application process out of the way and you've started temporary approval or annual license, you want to do this concurrently. So verifying that the proposed business premise location is consistent with the current permitted use of the building. And if not, you'll be required to get a building permit. So for instance, you might be leasing or purchasing a building that was previously used for office purposes. So it was just administrative offices, but now you want to use it for manufacturing. So in that case, the use or the occupancy of that building is not aligned with what your proposed use is. So you're going to need to change the use or occupancy of that building. And then again, in that case, what's going to be required is that you obtain a building permit, and that building permit would change the use from an office type occupancy to a manufacturing type occupancy. And that's going to probably require some updates to the building and also updates that you just want to make. You might need to move some walls, you might need to add a bathroom. Those are called tenant improvements. So in addition to the change of use that would be required, you're probably going to trigger some tenant improvements that you may make as an option just because you want to optimize the design of the floor plan. There's also going to be some things that are just required. An office building is not suited for the safety measures that are required for non-volatile manufacturing. So things like sprinklers and such are going to need to be added. And those are all going to be tenant improvements, and they all require building permits. So those would need to be prepared by an architect and engineer. They're very complicated plans. And again, at the end of this webinar, we'll provide some links to you on the Department of Building and Safety and these requirements that'll get you started. But building permits are likely required in most scenarios. And then the other item that's going to need to be required or obtained by the Department of Building and Safety is a certificate of occupancy. The certificate of occupancy is issued once construction is complete and the building has passed all inspections. So electrical inspections, structural inspections. There's many layers of inspections that would need to be done through the building permit process and the construction process. And once that's all complete, and this building is ready and safe to occupy, the building department, building and safety department would issue you a certificate of occupancy. And that gives you clearance from the building and safety department to operate. Similar to when you get an annual or temporary approval license from the Department of Cannabis Regulations, that gives you that authorization to operate a business within the business premise, but you need all of these concurrent to be able to open the doors in reality. So those are just a few with the Department of Building and Safety. Next, you have the fire department. This is a city department, and this one is mainly required for cultivation and manufacturing licenses, mainly because you might be using CO2 enrichment systems. If you're non-volatile extraction, you're going to be using extraction systems, and these are all going to require fire alarms and certain safety systems that you're going to need to make sure that you've got the correct fire permits for. And then the CUPA permit, CUPA permit, this is required for businesses that store hazardous materials over certain thresholds. For example, CO2, any chemicals that are used for your extraction system, and certain fertilizers. They're going to be required to have a CUPA permit. And again, we'll have links to the fire department resources at the end of this presentation. Last but not least is the Department of Public Health, and this is actually a county department. So the city is contracted with the county to issue what's called a public health permit. And the public health permit is a process to ensure that licensed cannabis businesses are complying with public health standards for consumers, state regulations, and local ordinances relating to construction, building materials, equipment and installation, and ventilation systems. So this is just another layer of permits that you'll need to obtain prior to operating. And you'll want to start this process after you're done pre-application, and probably pretty much as soon as you're applying for your temporary approval or annual license with the DCR is when you're going to want to start the Department of Public Health and a fire department process. So our next section is what is temporary approval? A quick rundown here. Temporary approval is a DCR issued temporary license that authorizes an applicant for a limited period of time to engage in commercial cannabis activity as would be permitted under the privileges of an annual license of the same type. The DCR is currently transitioning away from temporary approval and into an annual licensing process. Similarly, the state is also ending its provisional licensing program. Both of those license types, so the DCR temporary approval and the state provisional licenses, were always meant to be temporary. And again, both of them are phasing out over the next month. They will no longer be issued or available to applicants, and you'll have to apply for a annual license with the city, and you'll have to apply for an annual license with the state. So the processes for each of these aren't really going to change a ton, because provisional licenses and temporary approval licenses, the biggest difference between them and an annual license is that it didn't require CEQA compliance. So I wanted to note that while today a lot of what we're mentioning and referencing is the temporary approval workflow or the temporary approval license or process, we are transitioning, or the DCR is transitioning to annual licensing. Most of you on this call, unless you already are in the licensing process, annual licenses is really what's going to apply to you as you begin your journey to start a cannabis business. And again, what I just want to make sure that you know is we're referencing the temporary approval. It's soon going to transition to annual licensing. The process won't change a ton. So this is still all relevant information. There's just going to be some additional steps, and some of the forms and such might change. But again, like at a high level, the temporary approval process and annual licensing process will be relatively the same. So you don't need to disregard completely any of this information. Just know that it's going to change a little bit, and to keep your eyes peeled on DCR's website for any changes. Did want to make sure that we talked about the timeline for the transition to annual licenses. So a few weeks ago, May 1st, 2023, the Department of Cannabis Regulation launched its annual licensing application process. So businesses with temporary approval, currently with temporary approval and an active legal business entity record, will receive communications about next steps to transition from the temporary approval to the annual. And then instructions are not currently on the website for annual licensing, but again, keep your eyes peeled. In the next couple weeks or months, there will be more resources available. But for now, you can still familiarize yourself with the temporary approval process, because it won't be a huge jump or leap. June 30th, coming up soon here, June 30th, 2023, DCR applications abandoned after June 30th, 2023 must be refiled as an annual application unless the applicant has an active corresponding state provisional license. The other item to note for June 30th, 2023 is that this is the last day for general applicants to file for a new temporary approval application. So the last day for general applicants to file for a new temporary approval application. What does it mean to file? File means that you're submitting all of the documents for temporary approval and you're paying the fee. That technically gives you the status of application filed. If you haven't paid the fee, it's not filed. If you haven't submitted all the documents, it's not filed, right? So just one little caveat wanted to mention. For social equity individual applicants, you guys get an extra month to file a new temporary approval application. So your last day is July 31st, 2023. And like I said, you need to make sure if you're looking to apply for a temporary approval, you'll have to have all the documents uploaded and you'll have to have paid the fee by July 31st, 2023. And then December 31st, 2027, last day for temporary approval licenses to be in effect. So at that point, everyone will have to have switched over to an annual license because any temporary approval licenses will no longer be valid. And that is our timeline for the transition. Okay, so the subject matter for tonight's webinar, where we've been heading, is the initial inspection. So prior to temporary approval, we've talked about this a little bit already, but you'll have to have finished the getting started checklist. You will have to have completed the pre-application review, and your business premise location needs to be determined as compliant and eligible. And then you move on to the temporary approval license application or the annual license application. So the annual license application process or the temporary approval license process, the workflow is as such. It's a really brief workflow, but first you're going to submit the information required for the temporary approval application via the licensing portal. Second, DCR issues an invoice for that application and determination of eligibility. Third, the applicant pays those fees within 30 days of the invoice being issued. Fourth, the DCR reviews that application for completeness. And then fifth, once that application is deemed complete, the DCR emails the applicant confirming application completeness and next steps. So here you have just a graphic that exemplifies what I just went over, the 5 steps. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth is that the applicant receives an email confirming that their application is complete and they're ready for next steps. And what are those next steps? The next step is going to be your initial inspection. So how do you know you're ready for this initial inspection? When the DCR emails the applicant confirming them that they've reviewed it and it's complete, all the documents are complete, they'll receive an email that lets them know 3 things. 1, that the record status has been updated, and the status that you will receive is local compliance underway. And that means that you're ready to apply for your state license because you need that status of local compliance underway in order for the DCC to review your application. It is your state application. That is the first thing. Once you submit your state annual license and pay the annual license fee to the state, the first thing that they do is contact the DCR, and they need to receive a status of local compliance underway in order to take next steps and review your application. So that's obviously an important part of this step to note. That's when you'd be ready to apply for your state license. The second item is they let you know that you're ready for your initial inspection. It will basically give you all the instructions that I'm going to review today. But essentially, again, it's going to tell you you're ready for your initial inspection and here's how to request it. The other piece is the equity share review. Again, it'll give you instructions on how to do that. We're not going to review that process today. That's a whole nother webinar, but it'll tell you and give you instructions for equity share review as well. So in terms of the initial inspection process, initial inspection is required of the business premise conducted, it's a required inspection of the business premises, which is conducted by the DCR prior to issuance of a temporary approval license or an annual license. So this is required, it's done by the DCR, and it's really of the business premise and some of the operating procedures and documents and such. So the steps here are, number one, you want to prepare for the initial inspection, and we'll take a deep dive into how to prepare it. Number two is you schedule the inspection. Number three, DCR conducts the initial inspection. And number four would be scheduling any additional inspections if you do not pass the first one. So again, preparing for the initial inspection, there's a form that you're going to need to review, and it's basically a checklist for all of the things, a bullet point list that literally that the DCR is going to go through when they're conducting this inspection. So you need to sign the initial attestation form, which again, it pretty much serves as your checklist as well. And that is also a way for you to prepare ahead of time. But that's going to be first thing you want to do is check out that attestation form, review the checklist, fix anything that needs to be fixed, and then get that signed. And what you'll do is numbers two, you'll schedule the inspection. So you're going to request that inspection. You're going to, in an email, you'll have the subject line. It'll read request for initial inspection. That's all listed in these instructions on this slide here, but it's also going to be listed in the email. And so you have the title of the email that you want to copy paste. You've got the email address that you want to send this email to. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to attach the form that we just talked about, and then you'll provide the DCR with at least 3 dates. And then the DCR will respond back via email and confirm the dates and times for that initial inspection. And you are required to obviously let the DCR know if you need to cancel or reschedule. And they also provide you with a subject line, the email address that you need to send that to. So make sure, again, that you read the instructions. It's pretty straightforward, but it gives you the template language to use in these emails. If you do need to reschedule or cancel, just make sure that you're letting them know at least 48 hours in advance. Because if you don't let them know 48 hours in advance, you will receive a result of failed inspection. And you're going to need to schedule another one, obviously, but you have to pay a fee. If you do not cancel or reschedule within 48 hours, you'll have to pay a fee in order to get another inspection scheduled. So important to follow the instructions when it comes to scheduling the initial inspection. Really use the language that is provided to you in the email, and just make sure that you give at least 48 hours notice to DCR if you need to reschedule or change. The third step is actually conducting the initial inspection. So on the date of the initial inspection, DCR will give a brief introduction and provide information on how the initial inspection will be conducted. They will then conduct the initial inspection, checking compliance with items included in the initial inspection attestation form that we discussed. At the conclusion of the initial inspection, DCR will conduct a debrief with the applicant, discussing the initial inspection results and any next steps. The initial inspection will either fail or pass. If passed, the applicant will continue with the temporary approval application process or the annual license process. But if you fail, then you're going to need to schedule additional inspections, which is step number 4, which might not be required of everyone. So if you do fail, there's deficiencies that are found during that initial inspection, which cannot be immediately corrected. Those deficiencies will be documented, and a copy of the initial inspection report will be uploaded to the applicant's record. A failed inspection will require an additional initial inspection and a payment of related fees. So if you require a second inspection, you'll have to pay fees for that additional inspection. And before you can schedule it, or obviously before that next inspection is conducted, you'll need to make sure that invoice is paid. So that covers the 4-step process in initial inspections. And next, I wanted to talk about preparing for the initial inspection, reviewing basically checklist that the DCR is going to go through as they conduct that initial inspection. So this is the form, initial inspection attestation form. It looks similar to a lot of the other forms that we reviewed for the DCR, but you'll fill out the top portion. You need to read, obviously, the instructions and read through the form. And then at the end of the form, it will require a signature from ownership. The first section in the attestation form is business premise. And so there's several items that the DCR is going to look at when they get to the site. And starting, they're going to make sure that your business premise diagram that you submitted with your temporary approval application or your annual license application, they're going to make sure of a couple of things that basically it matches the actual layout of your business premise. So the points of entry into the business premise, are those accurately reflected on the business premise diagram? Also, interior doorways, rooms, walkways, we want to make sure that those are also accurately reflected on the business premise diagram. And then if you had any changes that were made to the business premise diagram, you'll need to make sure that those are submitted prior to the inspection and approved. So it is not uncommon that you initially submit your temporary approval, your annual license application, and then by the time you're ready for your inspection, that business premise diagram has changed. It's not uncommon. But what's important is that you provide the updated document to the DCR prior to this inspection, and that you make sure that you have received written approval from the DCR that they are aware of these changes. You don't want to have this one cause you to fail your inspection. It's a really easy one to resolve. So just check your records and make sure that DCR has a current copy of your floor plan. And the property and all associated parking under the control. So obviously things like trash and weeds, those you'll want to make sure that you've cleaned up the exterior of the site prior to the inspection. But another one is just to make sure that you don't have too many vehicles on site that aren't parked in proper parking spaces. That's one that I've seen cause issues, especially for like a delivery company. You might drive up their order. You just need to make sure that you've got proper vehicle flow, and enough spaces for everyone. So that's a big one too. So the next section that the DCR will take a look at with you during the inspection is security and video surveillance systems. I always tell people that this inspection is really heavy on security, because that's really what DCR's role is to make sure that not only safety of the consumers and the public, but safety of employees and business owners. So this inspection is very heavy on security and video surveillance systems. Number one, you're going to need to make sure that you've hired or contracted a security personnel who are not employees of the licensee to provide security services. And this depends what security services are required, depends on the license that you're operating. But you'll provide that information on the attestation form. You'll need to provide which security company you've contracted or hired to provide security services. And the next item that they're going to look at is limited access areas. And they're going to make sure that those are securely locked, utilizing commercial grade, non-residential door locks. And this includes points of entry and exit to the business premise, but also anywhere that cannabis products or cannabis are going to be stored at any time, whether it's an overnight storage or whether it's a work area that product is stored during business hours. Those are limited access areas, and they all need to have secure locks, commercial grade locks. The third one is the licensee has a functioning alarm system, which is permitted by Los Angeles Police Department. Alarm information is provided, must be provided, and if not, it must also be like displayed. So sometimes you're required to put what's like called a UL certificate in the entryways, and along with your license certificates, you'll want your alarm certificate up there as well. But again, they're going to check to make sure that your alarm system is functioning and that it's permitted. Next, the business premise has a digital video surveillance system with a minimum camera resolution of 1,280 by 720 pixels, with each camera permanently mounted and in a fixed location. So that camera resolution is a big one. In addition, on those surveillance cameras, they're going to make sure that they're recording 24 hours a day, and the storage device for recording is secured in a manner to prevent tampering or theft. Surveillance records are kept for a minimum of 90 days. So in terms of your cameras themselves, again, they need to be recording 24 hours a day, and the storage for the camera records needs to be secure and in a manner that prevents tampering or theft. So those need to be located and shown to the DCR as well. Number 6, all the entrances and exits to the business premises are recorded by the video surveillance system from both the indoor and outdoor vantage points. So again, you'll want a camera on the outside that's showing the entry into the building, and then once you get into the building, needs to be that's pointed at the front door that shows people once they're in the building. And number 7, all limited access areas, including the security rooms, areas of storage, etc., are recorded by the video surveillance system from both interior and exterior. So again, rooms that have the security equipment, recordings stored in there, areas for cannabis storage, those all need to have cameras that are placed and recording for both interior and exterior doorways or vantage points. Last one here, if applicable, if you've got point of sale areas and areas where cannabis goods are displayed for sale, you need to make sure that they also have video surveillance systems and are being recorded. The last part of the inspection will be administrative. And the first component of the administrative inspection would be is that there's an electronic age verification device to determine the age of any individual attempting to purchase cannabis goods. This is obviously for retail. So again, if you've got a retail operation, you'll have to have the electronic age verification device. The other piece that they'll make sure is that no portion of the business premise has been sublet without written approval from DCR. So DCR and the state require that you do not have any portion of your business premise sublet. Number 3, records retention system is in place. So similar to the recordings, the surveillance system recordings, you need to have other records stored in a safe place. So like your inventory records, such. Number 4 that they'll be checking is to make sure that you've got a track and trace inventory system in place. So they'll want to verify what track and trace or inventory system are you using, and they'll take a look around. Next, the procedures are in place to notify DCR within 24 hours of any of the following: inventory discrepancy, suspicion of theft or loss, suspicion of change or alteration of records, and suspicion of any breach in security. So they're going to make sure that you've got these procedures printed and easily accessible for staff and for training purposes, So you want to make sure that you have those procedures printed out. Additionally, you'll want to make sure that management or persons in charge grant DCR inspectors unrestricted access to the business premise to conduct the inspection. No licensee, agent, or employee shall interfere with, obstruct, or impede DCR's inspection. So this is just a must. It's a requirement of operating a cannabis business. And so obviously, if this is something that you can't offer the DCR, it's going to impede on your ability to pass the inspection. So that concludes the DCR initial inspection preparation. And before we move over to the question and answer portion of the webinar, I just wanted to make sure that you guys know this recording will be available. And through this recording, you'll be able to find the links that you'll want to reference moving through the temporary approval process, as well as the other permits and clearances that we talked about. So here you've got your getting started checklist. You've got the temporary approval documents that we talked about, the list of temporary approval forms, as well as the initial attestation and inspection attestation form that you'll want to use. These ones are probably really important to you because you're probably pretty well versed, or at least have started to verse yourself with the DCR's licensing process, but maybe not so much with the fire department, Department of Public Health, Department of Building and Safety. So here I've linked out to all three of those other departments with the city and county that you want to be aware of. And then I also linked out to the state application and license fees, as well as resources for that application process. And last, number 8, I do think it's really helpful for everybody when you're really ready to start this licensing 101 webinar that that Jason Killeen did from the Department of Cannabis Regulations. This one goes over all of the processes with the DCR in great length. So from getting started all the way through to temporary approval, and that is one long webinar that'll show you everything. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that one because I find it very helpful. That being said, love to move over to the question and answer portion of the webinar. And I think Frank is going to jump on and join us.
Hi, Courtney. Thank you very much. Lots of great information, a lot of content there. So, certainly I want to encourage everyone to reference that, and good job on referencing some of the other webinars and events that have taken place. Several questions. I'm going to ask this first one just to, I don't know if this is something you can answer directly, but maybe there's some experience there. Svetoslav submitted a question, and it is, what security services are required for a micro business operating with a non-retail delivery, distribution, type 6 manufacturing? Mainly, does it need to have an armed guard if there is no access to the building premises for the general public?
That's a great question. Yeah. So for a micro business, I'm glad you listed the different licenses that you'd be operating underneath the micro business, because that obviously is very important to being able to answer that. And so if you don't have it open to the general public, you don't need an armed guard on site. You'll need an alarm, a company to install all of your equipment that is UL. Need to be a certain caliber professional to install the equipment, and then your alarm system needs to be monitored by a security company as well. And then if you do have a security company that's doing any kind of monitoring overnight when the business premise is closed, but they might be doing rounds in the parking lot and such, provide that information to the DCR as well. But you don't need to have the armed guard if you're not operating retail.
Okay, great clarification. Makes sense. Makes total sense. Okay, another question. do I apply for my state license at the same time as my local license?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit. I kind of meant to come back to it, do a little bit of a recap, ask this question. But if you remember correctly, in the temporary approval process, at the end, right before you receive authorization for the initial inspection, basically you've submitted all the documents for temporary approval or the annual license, and it's gone under the review, you've paid the fees, and the DCR has confirmed that your application is complete. The DCR will send you a notification that says your status of your record has changed and that you're ready for the initial inspection. That status change of the record is where you'll then receive the local compliance underway, and DCR needs to assign that status to your temporary approval or annual state license application before your state license can move forward with a review process and approval. So things definitely happen in a linear fashion, meaning you've got to have the temporary approval submitted and paid for, and you have to have that desk review of all the documents done. And DCR changes the status to under local compliance underway before your state license can move forward. So that is important to know. You might not receive your temporary approval and state license at the same time, but you can do it concurrently.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you. Another question, when and where do I register for the City of Los Angeles's business tax registration certificate?
This one, so the business tax registration certificate is not done through the DCR licensing portal. This is actually a form that it's on the getting started checklist that we provided in the resources page here. But there's a form that you need to fill out and sign, and you would send it to the DCR, and that is actually filed with the Office of Finance. Once that application is approved, you get a business tax registration certificate number, and then that allows you to move forward with your business account on the DCR's licensing portal. So it is an important step. It's on the getting started checklist. There's links to the form and how to apply for it. So reference that because there's a few things you need to do before you can apply for that. And before you can start a business account on DCR, you need to have this business tax registration certificate. So important to know where process this registration lies.
Yep, great. Got to chase down all these forms, right? For sure, right? There's a question again. I don't know if this, see if you can, respond to this one, or if this one has to be a follow-up from the DCR. Brandon submitted a question: as a verified social equity individual, am I able to hold more than one retail storefront license?
As I just want to say that there storefront available in limited numbers to social equity individual applicants, and they were allotted to social equity individual applicants in the lottery that was done in 2022. So if you have the opportunity to apply for a retail storefront at this time, you would know. And there may be more licenses that become available to social equity individual applicants at a later date, but we don't have that information right now. But the question about can you hold more than one storefront license? Yes, you can technically, but I don't know that that opportunity would really present itself, other than if you are getting involved in a retail license via buying one, right? That would be maybe an opportunity to get an additional storefront license or involved in more than one. but otherwise they're issued through the lottery, and the lottery was
Mhm.
in 2022. You'd know if you
Yep,
were a winner at that point.
right.
Yep.
Okay, good. Good clarification. They can certainly call to get any additional clarification, call into the DCR phone number as well. Another question that's come in: how long does the building permit and construction phase typically take for a project?
That is a very specific question that is
Hmm.
based on the condition of the site and the building that you are intending to operate. Um, so you might just have an empty building with no walls inside, no bathrooms, no construction, right? And it just needs to be pretty much completely built on the inside. That's obviously a lot more work than one that maybe just needs to be have some light construction, a couple of walls removed, and some pipes replaced, right? So
Hmm.
it's a big variation from building to building, depending on what work has been done in the past, how old the building is, et cetera. So regardless, if you have to go through the building permit process and get a new certificate of occupancy, minimum is 6 months that you're looking at
Hmm.
to from the day you submit a plan to the or permit to the building department to get that building permit issued till you complete construction and get that certificate of occupancy. At the bare minimum is 6 months. So it's something you've really got to be prepared for, and working on diligently.
Yeah, we've seen. I mean, to your comment, we've seen all of the above, and it's longer than you expect and plan for. So just be patient, and be persistent
Yeah.
to get through the process. Right? I know there's a lot of
Honestly, one of
moving
the
parts.
things too is obviously process, right? And um it's complicated, but one thing that folks don't account for is how limited availability there is of
Hmm.
licensed architects and engineers and how they work. Many of these firms have a queue, like a lot of projects in the works
Hmm.
when you call them, and then by the time they're ready to bring your project on and start working on it, it's sometimes almost 2 months, 2.5 months after you signed a contract. And it's not just cannabis specific, it's really
Hmm.
generally speaking, there's not enough licensed contractors and engineers to support the demand. So
Right.
it's just kind of a reality that you need to be aware of, that all of the different components, preparing the building permits, submitting them for review, and then the construction components, it's
Hmm.
a lot of moving parts, and not everybody's going to be on your schedule.
Right. Sounds like a business opportunity right there as well. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay, another question that has come in. What's the difference between a business account and individual account on the DCR's licensing portal, and how are they used?
Great question. Yeah, so DCR's licensing portal is what you'll use to get verified as a social equity individual applicant, which most everyone on this webinar has already done. So
Hmm.
you've registered as an individual and you went through the process to get verified as a social equity individual. The other component to the accounts is a business account. And most everyone who's applying for a license is going to start a business account. And the business account, in the getting started checklist, is where it lists out in detail when you want to initiate and start that account. You need a couple things done before you can start a business account. One is to get that tax registration certificate we just talked
Hmm.
about with the Department of Finance, but you need to have the business entity registered with the state and with the IRS. So those things need to be completed between you opening your individual account and opening your business account, right? You need to have the
Hmm.
business entity registered, and you need to have that tax certificate with the city before you start that business account. Once you've done that, that's when you start a business user account on the DCR licensing portal. And that's where you'll manage your business records, ownership, the social equity a component of your business. All of that stuff is
Mhm.
done on your business user account, as well as the pre-application, your annual license application. All of that is done through that business user account. So when
Mhm.
you're ready, and once you've reviewed that getting started checklist and completed the initial steps, you'll start that business user account.
Yeah, great. Yep, you'll be very familiar with the DCR's licensing portal for sure, right?
Yes.
Lots of information to enter in.
Yep.
Okay, and I think our final question, this is a good one, right? What is the difference between submitting an application and filing an application?
The distinction between the two is that when you submit a record, that just means that you've started the submittal, you've submitted documents, and you've hit submit. And so you've got a record that's been produced on the DCR licensing portal for whether it's pre-application or your annual license. So a record's been submitted. Then in terms of once it changes the status to filed, that's after you've
Mm,
paid the fee. And
mm,
so submittal is really just when the documents and forms and information have been submitted. Filing is when the documents, forms, information, and the fee have been paid.
mm.
And that means once it's been filed, the DCR will start taking a look at it and reviewing it, and moving you through the
Yeah.
process.
I mean, is that a note? Do you receive a notification that it's filed, or is
Yeah.
it something? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And
Okay.
typically I'll take a screenshot after
Hmm.
I've hit the submit button. And then I'll
Hmm.
also take a screenshot of the invoice once it's been paid, just so I
Hmm.
have those records. Um, glitches happen, things happen. So it's
Yeah.
good to make sure you've got all your records saved.
Yeah. Good idea. Great suggestion. Well, Courtney, thank you. Lots of great information. Thank you as always for your presentation and your participation and your education for City of LA and DCR. Thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. As we mentioned, this webinar recording will be found on DCR's Learning Management System. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.